The USS Tang slid away from the pier at Pearl Harbor before dawn on February 23, 1944. The sea was black glass under the stars, the horizon just a pale edge of steel. Her captain, Commander Richard O'Kane, stood on the bridge as the island faded behind him, silent, determined, already thinking of the enemy ship somewhere beyond the curve of the earth. O'Kane was a small man with sharp eyes and a quiet voice, but every sailor aboard Tang knew he was the best in the business. He'd served under the legendary Dudley "Mush" Morton on Wahoo, one of the most feared American submarines of the early war. O'Kane had learned from the master how to stalk a convoy, how to strike fast and vanish into the depths before the first depth charge hit. Now the Tang was his own command, new, sleek and deadly. Just 311 feet long, packed with 24 torpedoes and 80 men, she was more cramped than a freight elevator and twice as dangerous. Every bulkhead vibrated with the pulse of machinery and the heartbeat of her crew. Their orders: patrol the waters around Truk and the Mariana Islands, a stretch of ocean crawling with Japanese shipping. O'Kane's mission was simple in words, impossible in practice: sink everything that moved. The first patrol set the tone. Within weeks, Tang attacked a convoy under cover of darkness, firing 4 torpedoes in 90 seconds. 3 hit home, explosions that turned night into firelight. As Japanese escorts swept in, O'Kane took his boat deep, silent as a ghost, while depth charges rolled above them like thunder from an angry god. When the noise faded, he rose to periscope depth. The horizon burned with oil and flame. One merchant ship still floated, broken-backed. O'Kane gave the order: 1 more torpedo. "Let her have it," he said quietly. A single flash ended the ship's story. By the time Tang returned to Pearl Harbor, she'd sunk 10 ships. O'Kane was just getting started. By mid-1944, the Tang had become a legend whispered across the submarine piers at Pearl Harbor. Other crews watched O'Kane's men swagger ashore with salt in their hair and quiet pride in their eyes. They weren't boastful. They didn't need to be. Everyone knew Tang's numbers: dozens of ships destroyed, convoys scattered, the Pacific carved open by one steel predator. O'Kane's secret was nerve. Where most captains fired from safety at long range, he crept in close, suicidally close, often attacking from inside the enemy's own screen of destroyers. His motto was simple: get within 800 yards, then hit hard. He called it the down-the-throat shot, aiming straight at a destroyer charging head-on. A single well-timed torpedo could shatter an attacker before its depth charges ever left the racks. During one night patrol in the Formosa Strait, the sea was black and the sky glowed faintly with distant lightning. Radar picked up a convoy, 7 ships with 2 escorts. O'Kane surfaced, running on diesel engines, threading through the rain squalls. "Battle stations," he said calmly, the phrase that turned the sub into a single living organism. He fired 4 torpedoes. 2 cargo ships erupted in sheets of flame. The escorts lunged forward, propellers roaring. O'Kane stayed on the surface, weaving through the chaos like a wolf among oxen. Another torpedo struck a transport amidships, breaking it clean in half. The counterattack came fast, sonar pings echoing through the hull, then the distant whoomp-whoomp of depth charges. The Tang Dove leveled off at 400 feet and waited. The lights flickered. The air grew hot and thin. Somewhere above, destroyers circled, guessing, dropping steel and hate. But O'Kane barely moved. He simply watched the depth gauge and murmured, "Steady, boys. She can take it." An hour later, silence returned. The crew exhaled together, the kind of breath men only release when death itself gives up. When Tang surfaced at dawn, all that remained of the convoy was a smudge of smoke on the horizon. By the summer's end, Tang had sunk more enemy tonnage than any submarine in the fleet. Her crew received medals. O'Kane earned the Navy Cross, but he wanted only to go back out. One last patrol, he told them, to end the war faster. It would be the patrol that ended Tang instead. In late September 1944, the Tang left Pearl Harbor for what would be her 5th war patrol. Her orders were to intercept Japanese convoys fleeing the Philippines as the Allies closed in. The crew had been through 4 victorious missions, veterans now, confident, efficient, and bound together by the kind of trust only men in steel coffins could understand. As they cast off, O'Kane stood on the bridge, watching the shoreline shrink into mist. He'd told a friend before leaving, "If we don't come back, just remember, we did our job." He had no way of knowing how close those words would cut to truth. The Tang slipped through the Pacific like a whisper, stopping first at Midway for refuel, then onto the Formosa Strait, a graveyard of ships and submarines. The sea there was narrow, shallow, and swarming with enemy escorts, a place most captains avoided. But O'Kane chose it deliberately. "Where there's danger," he said, "there's traffic, and where there's traffic, there's targets." In the first week of October, the Tang struck 2 convoys in as many nights. A tanker went up in a column of flame 300 feet high, another ship broke in half under a full moon. O'Kane fired torpedoes so close he could feel the shock waves shudder through the hull. The men trusted him completely. Even when depth charges rained around them, 50, 60 in a row, O'Kane's voice stayed steady. "Hold depth," he'd say. "They can't kill what they can't find." By the 23rd of October, the Tang's torpedo room was nearly empty. Only 2 fish remained. Ahead, radar picked up a final target, a crippled Japanese transport limping north, escorted by a single patrol craft. O'Kane couldn't resist one more strike, the last hunt of their incredible patrol. "Set for a surface attack," he ordered. "We'll finish this one under the stars." The Tang rose into the night, black water streaming from her deck. The crew worked in practiced silence. The first torpedo streaked away, a perfect hit. The enemy ship erupted in a blinding flash. O'Kane turned to his helmsman. "One more to end it," he said. He gave the order to fire. The final torpedo slid from its tube and changed history. The final torpedo left the Tang's stern tube at 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944. The ocean was glassy, the sky a sweep of stars. Commander Richard O'Kane leaned into the periscope, watching the pale white wake of the weapon cut through the Black Sea toward its target, a crippled Japanese transport, already burning from the first hit. The torpedo should have struck in seconds. Instead, O'Kane saw something impossible. The wake curved, just slightly but unmistakably. It began to bend back. "Hard right rudder!" he shouted. The order came too late. A malfunction in the Mark 18 electric torpedo's steering gyro sent it into a perfect arc. It looped back toward the Tang, silent and deadly, the submarine's own weapon, turning traitor. O'Kane and his crew barely had time to react before a blinding flash tore through the aft section. The explosion lifted the submarine's stern out of the water like a breaching whale. The lights went out. Steam and smoke filled the control room. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The Tang heaved violently, then began to sink, stern first, into the darkness. O'Kane shouted for the men to seal compartments, but it was useless. Water poured through shattered hatches. In less than a minute, the aft torpedo room was gone. The boat hit bottom at about 180 feet, crushed, silent, half of her crew already dead or trapped. The survivors groped through the dark, coughing in the burning air. The forward compartments were still intact but filling slowly. O'Kane took charge, calm even now. "We'll use the escape gear," he said. "One at a time, no panic." They gathered what they could. Mumps and lungs, life vests, prayer. One by one, men crawled through the escape trunk and vanished upward into blackness. Some made it, most did not. When O'Kane's turn came, he hesitated, making sure others went first. Then he climbed into the trunk, sealed it behind him, and flooded the chamber. The icy water closed over his head. He kicked hard, rising through the cold, fighting the pressure, lungs burning. Just as he thought he'd never reach the surface, his head broke through. The night was silent except for the hiss of waves and the faint crackle of burning ships. He was alone, floating amid wreckage, the hunter now the hunted, the ocean his only companion. Only 9 men from Tang's crew survived the explosion. When dawn came over the Formosa Strait, the sea was calm again. Commander O'Kane clung to a piece of debris, salt burning his eyes, ears ringing from the explosion that had destroyed his ship. He called out, but only a few voices answered through the mist. 9 men out of 87 were alive. They were spotted by the crew of a Japanese frigate sent to investigate the wreckage. The enemy sailors hauled the survivors aboard roughly, shoving rifle butts into their backs. O'Kane was last up the ladder, bruised, exhausted, still somehow standing straight. One Japanese officer looked at him curiously. "This your boat?" he asked in broken English. O'Kane just nodded. The officer pointed toward the smoking patch of sea. "She fight very good," he said quietly. The survivors were blindfolded and taken to a naval prison at Takao, Formosa. Interrogations began immediately. Sleep deprivation, beatings, endless questions about patrol routes and tactics. O'Kane refused to give details beyond his name, rank, and serial number. When a guard struck him for silence, he simply said, "You already sank my ship, that's all you'll get." After weeks in solitary cells, the men were transferred to Japan in the hold of a transport ship, the same kind of vessel Tang had once hunted. It was bitter irony. America's top submarine crew, now locked beneath the decks of their former prey. They arrived at the Ofuna interrogation camp near Yokohama, a place known for breaking prisoners. Rations were handfuls of rice. Punishment came for the smallest infraction. Still, the Tang men endured. O'Kane kept morale alive by whispering small routines, imaginary watch shifts, quiet prayers, talk of home. He told his men, "If we could fight in the dark under 180 feet of water, we can survive this." As the months passed, the war's tide turned. From their fenced compound they saw distant flashes, American bombers striking the city. Each explosion was both terrifying and hopeful. By summer 1945, rumors spread that Japan was losing. When the guards' arrogance began to crumble, the prisoners knew it was true. On August 15, 1945, the camp commander gathered the prisoners and said simply, "War finished." Some men laughed, others wept. O'Kane stood silent, eyes closed, remembering the Tang lying on the seabed, his ship, his crew, his brothers. When the war ended, the gates of Ofuna opened. American soldiers, lean and ragged, stepped into the sunlight for the first time in nearly a year. Richard O'Kane could barely walk. Months of starvation had whittled him to a shadow. Yet when the stars and stripes rose over the camp, he stood straight, saluting with trembling fingers. Within days, O'Kane and the surviving Tang crew were flown to Guam for medical care. There, doctors wept as they weighed them, skeletons in uniforms. Still, the men smiled. They were alive, and they had done their duty. O'Kane's first request wasn't for food or comfort. It was to send word to the families of his crew, especially the 80 who would never come home. In Washington, the Navy called Tang's patrol record unmatched. Her 5 missions had sunk 33 enemy ships, totaling over 116,000 tons, the highest confirmed tonnage of any U.S. submarine in World War II. O'Kane himself had contributed to even more while serving earlier aboard Wahoo. In March 1946, at the White House, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around O'Kane's neck. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." O'Kane accepted it not for himself, but for the men who'd gone down with Tang. "They earned it," he said softly. He stayed in the Navy after the war, serving until 1957 before retiring as a captain. In his later years, he wrote and spoke about submarine warfare, always humble, always reverent toward the lives lost beneath the Pacific. His book, Clear the Bridge, remains one of the most authentic accounts of life aboard a WW2 submarine, a mixture of courage, fear, and duty under impossible pressure. When Richard O'Kane passed away in 1994, the Navy buried his ashes at sea, near the waters where Tang still rests. A new submarine, USS O'Kane, now carries his name, a living monument to the quiet man who led from the shadows. The ocean keeps its secrets, But the story of Tang endures. The tale of a crew who fought, fell, and became immortal in the deep. After liberation in 1945, the 9 survivors of Tang's crew returned home to quiet lives scattered across the United States. Some rejoined the Navy, others married and built families, but all carried the same unspoken burden, the memory of 80 shipmates resting forever in the deep. For years, they gathered at reunions, raising a silent toast to those still on patrol. Commander Richard O'Kane became the voice of their legacy. His post-war writings captured the claustrophobia, courage, and humanity of submarine warfare like no one else could. He described not glory but endurance, the long hours, the fear of a single leak, the constant nearness of death. His leadership lessons are still taught at the U.S. Naval Academy today. For decades, Tang's wreck lay undiscovered. The exact spot where her final torpedo had turned back was uncertain, wartime records were vague, and the sea had kept its silence. But in 2007, a joint American-Japanese survey team confirmed the location of a submarine wreck in the Formosa Strait at a depth of around 180 feet, precisely where Tang was believed to have gone down. Sonar scans and debris patterns matched her design exactly. The site was declared a war grave, protected by international law. No attempt was made to raise her. In 1996, 2 years after O'Kane's death, the U.S. Navy commissioned USS O'Kane, DDG-77, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. At her launching, the surviving Tang crewmen stood on the pier, old now, some in wheelchairs, all with tears in their eyes. The destroyer's captain saluted them and said, "The spirit of Tang sails again." Today, beneath the waters of the Formosa Strait, the rusting hull of Tang rests in silence, a tomb, a monument, and a reminder. 80 men gave their lives in one of the most extraordinary naval stories ever told, a story of courage, tragedy, and honor beneath the waves. No one who served in her, O'Kane once wrote, ever truly left her. Part of us is still down there holding the line.